Kia ora, everybody. Welcome to the Invisible Sensei podcast. And I always say this, it's always. So if you're listening to this, I'm really excited that you're listening. And if you're watching this, or if you listen and you watch this, I'm double excited that you get to spend some time with a friend of mine that I met up in Aurora, Canada at a seminar, Buddha Without Borders, Steve Sensei, big shout out to the Shoshinkan Dojo last year. And since then, I've been following her training and her blog and a whole bunch of other things that she's involved in. It's really a pleasure when you've got someone who is multidisciplined as Jennifer Thompson Sensei, who's joining us from Ontario this morning. When I'm doing this morning, it's probably the afternoon. And what's really cool is that if you get an opportunity to check out the Martial Muse on Instagram and TikTok, you're always going to get some really cool drops of knowledge and some training inspiration. So it's hard to keep up with what she does because, to be totally honest, 1 minute she's grappling, she's doing BJJ, the next minute she's doing high level karate, next minute she's boxing, next minute kickboxing. It is really, really difficult to measure up to that. And it does make me feel kind of lazy in comparison. So Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on the Invisible Sensei podcast. I have the Martial Muse meets Invisible Sensei. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm always flattered when people are interested in anything I have to say.
You know, it's always a surprise to me when people listen to anything I have to say. But I have to say that one of the things I really appreciate also is the as I said in the intro, the multidisciplinary nature of your background in Krav Maga, which is really interesting to me as a style. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, kickboxing, all the many things that you undertake. So I'm going to kick in with a question, if I may, right off the top. For you, studying all these different arts, when is an appropriate time? Because I know for me, when I was coming up back in the day, in the 1800s, I think I went to anything that had the word martial arts attached to it. I was doing taekwondo, I was doing karate, I was doing judo, all these different things, and mainly as a Q grade. So perhaps the timing wasn't so hot for me. How do you balance the disciplines? How do they feed in together? And when's a good time to start looking at other disciplines, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a great question. So for me, I've been very fortunate that I've just had the opportunity to have, so many disciplines available to me. I originally started in wrestling, which I think is a really great way for any person to start. It's a great introductory martial art because it is very accessible. A lot middle schools have it, high schools have it. So people can start it at a pretty young age. And I originally started because my brother was like, hey, you're kind of butch. Why don't you join the wrestling team? And he was kind of coaching and bringing people in. So I was like, yeah, okay. Because I was a big fan of pro wrestling. So that was kind of like the next, I was like, oh, and when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pro wrestler. And I was like, this would be a great stepping stone for that. And then the wrestling team got canceled. And so I was like, oh, I want to do something like this. So my mom asked if I wanted to do karate. And so I started doing that. So I was lucky to kind of get introduced to both things very early. And then I think it's actually some people would say only stick to one thing. And that depends on what your goal is. Like if you want to be like a world champion and you need to, generally, it's probably best to stick to just one sport and master it. For me, when I was coming up, I was doing both karate and wrestling at the same time. So I was practicing karate once to twice a week. And then I was doing wrestling almost like at least 5 times a week. And at one point I was doing wrestling in the mornings, starting at 6 a.m. And we'd have practices for 2 hours or so. And then we'd have wrestling practices in the evening. And so that was usually like good 3 times a week. And then in the evenings, I would have wrestling practice right after school, and then I'd have a nap at home, and then I'd go to karate right afterwards. Which I think that's only for the insane. For example, like today, me and my husband, we left for kickboxing at 8:15 this morning. And so we do that for an hour and a half. And then we head over to BJJ, and then we assist with the kids' class for an hour. And then we do the competition class for an hour. And usually we would do yoga for BJJ after that, but people were already really exhausted, so nobody did it that today. But when I was talking to my husband, I was like, normal people don't do this. This is a little bit crazy. So I know that doesn't necessarily answer all of your question, but yeah, it's like, I think it's it's just having one thing as the base for you to kind of branch off and learn about other things. Because I know, for example, before we started the recording, we were talking about Hanshi Patrick McCarthy, and he does do a very good job of bringing all the different styles together and finding like the key concepts that are found across all these different things. And so as long as you have like a really good base in one thing, I was fortunate to have it both in wrestling and in karate, and I immediately saw the crossover from the get-go, which was a wonderful thing, because when I got introduced to Koro Uchinadi, I was like, yes, like this is it. In some ways it seems obvious, but it really broke it down in a way that made a lot of sense. Talking about the ancient machines and talking about levers and exactly how they work and how to make them more effective is extremely valuable.
It's interesting to me too that you came from wrestling to karate, because you usually find that people who do karate then at some point, to sort of make their training more fulsome, will go to some kind of grappling and Olympic wrestling. I'm a big fan of Olympic wrestling. I have two brothers who were very good Olympic wrestlers in New Zealand.
Oh,
and,
wow!
Actually, one of them was in the New Zealand Olympic development team, and they're both like, I'm 6'4", my brothers are like 5'5", and they can both wrap me in knots, no problems.
Oh, yeah.
that was my introduction to wrestling. So when you were talking also too, about your background in Koro Uchinadi and talking about Hanshi Patrick McCarthy, it's interesting to me because I remember watching him back in it must have been the late 80s, early 90s. And for the first time seeing someone who was working right through the whole range of the different ranges. So he was, kicking range, and then striking range, and then standing grapple, and then Nagewaza, he's throwing people, and then he was doing Newaza as the finish. And I remember one in particular, he did this Boston Crab thing.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You said professional wrestling. Yes, I can kind of agree on that. Now, with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, and the other things that you're involved in, there's obviously the immediate feedback. Like when you're doing a technique, because you're working with a partner, whether or not you get a sense of distance and timing and whether or not it works, so that there's an instant kind of understanding. With karate, not so much, and I know that flow drills are an important part of most dojo training now. I would go so far as to say it was probably the forerunner, was really the front runner when it came to doing flow drills, as more than 5 or 6 moves long, but actually entire sequences based on kata. So for you, in terms of karate, where do the flow drills sit and where does sparring sit?
So yeah, that's a really great question. So when we talk about flow drills, and for example, in Koro Uchinadi, we have like Riai Kumite and Tagumi, which kind of combines everything together, which is a nice way of kind of leading into sparring. So the idea is we have this, it's in wrestling, it's in BJJ too, where it's like, you're just like constantly in this, in BJJ, they call them like infinity drills, where it's like, it starts, one person goes, and then immediately the other person's in the defensive position, and then they go, and it's just constant. If you want it to go on forever, it can. So what's nice about that is, one, is really repetitive, so that if you get it wrong on the first rep, that's okay, because you're going to get a good 100 more reps within the training session. So you're going to get it right eventually, at least if you're paying attention. And so you can also control the pace and the tempo of how things go. So someone could be hitting you really hard, but if you want to do the movement, like for example, if we do like a hook punch and then you block and then you go underneath, that like you can control that tempo if you want. And it was funny, like within BJJ, like we were doing we were rolling, and it was live rolling. And like the feeling that you get, like for example, when you're doing kind of sticky hand techniques or tagumi or any type of flow drill, like I was feeling that while I was rolling, in the sense that one of the people that one of my colleagues in Calgary, Cody Stewart, he calls it probing, where it's like, it's exactly like, so if someone's like hitting you in the arm and you're trying to control exactly where the arm goes, you're tracking it. That's exactly what I was doing within the rolling session. And again, that part of where I learned that was through doing tagumi. It's just being able to figure out where the center of the momentum is happening. I'm not sure if that's the right way to phrase it, but hopefully that makes sense. It's like, it just helps you to internalize specific movements and feelings in a very efficient way. And because it's so repetitive, and you slowly kind of build up more momentum as you're going through it, and it lends itself easily into moving into aggressive resistance.
You know, that's one thing I really enjoy. When I've met people who have been involved in a kuruchinade, or indeed had some experience of it, they have such detailed explanations in terms of being able to make people understand what the goal is. So I'm always really appreciative of that. So, you know, in terms of influences, in terms of people that you go, that's who I'd like to grapple like, that's who I'd like to do karate like, that's the kata I'd like to do. You know, that's the boxer that I'm going, that's who I'm kind of styling. I mean, for me, one of my favorite boxers and martial artists of all time is a Dutch boxer, kickboxer, karateka, fencer, shooter, Lucia Rijker. Who I think never kind of got the props that she deserved, because she was kind of a next level boxer, a kickboxer who basically destroyed everyone in the kickboxing ring, so had to go to boxing. I believe she was in archery. She was a champion shooter, and was very much a proponent of having women's boxing in the Olympics. Was a massive mover and shaker. And I just remember watching her, and she applied this kind of Zen aspect to her martial arts. So for me, people like that have always, you know, and I'm not a boxer, although I have boxed good, so I've boxed fruit, the occasional present. But when I look at people of that standing, they're going, that's kind of what you call in Māori, a taumata. A taumata is kind of a level. That's the kind of level that I would aspire to. So in terms of, I guess, people who inspire you in places you want to go, that taumata, who would you kind of put in that?
Well, honestly, it's like, I think a lot of the times people think extremely high up. Like, I would love to be able to work with someone like George St. Pierre, or like be as good as a martial artist as he is. I think he's definitely one of the best there's ever been within MMA. But at the same time, like, as far as leveling up, it's like, I'm not gonna get to that level at this point in my life. But I do look at the people around me that I'm like, oh, I really wish I could move like them. I could do things like them. Like, for example, you know, our BJJ instructor, he's wonderful. And like I see the way he moves, and he's very playful when he's rolling. And I was like, and he's very explosive when he needs to be. And I was like, oh man, when I want to roll like that, I want to move like that, I want to do BJJ like that. And then, for example, when we were doing kickboxing, speaking of like Dutch kickboxing, so the gentleman we train with, who is probably one of my favorite people ever, he's so good and also extremely multifaceted. Like he did karate when he was a kid, he does BJJ, he does kickboxing, boxing, Krav Maga. He's where I got my Krav Maga purple belt from. You see the way he moves and he's able to strike, and it's like, I just want to be like that. It's like I don't have like grandiose dreams of being as good as any UFC fighter, but it's really I gain inspiration by those who surround me, and I've been very fortunate to find people who have been really wonderful to work with. So yeah, it's not a matter of me finding like the pinnacle of martial arts. It's about finding the people who, one, I enjoy training with, and just enjoy being around, and and then trying to just get as much knowledge from them as I can.
I totally agree, in the sense that when it comes to, martial arts are an interesting thing, and they're kind of a juxtaposition in the sense that I think, especially if you have students, young students, we live in this kind of Western mentality of there has to be some really clear goal, some kind of award or some kind of championship or some kind of this and that. And I'm not begging that, but the idea of doing the art for the art's sake and enjoying the training and kind of learning about yourself along the way is something which I think is not missing, but I don't think it's understood. And one thing I'll mention is you and your lovely husband, Josh, are both martial artists. I imagine that having a partner who you don't have to explain to, actually able to actually train, must be really important too. I know I reflect on that because I'm very lucky that my partner is, she's a martial artist, and she is very, very, very understanding, more so than probably what I would be. And it's funny when you're talking about, this is not the normal people don't do things like that. I think it's important to find the thing you like and just to continue doing it. So in terms of having a live-in training partner, how have you found, how is it navigating, just relationship and martial arts? I know for me, there are times when I've kind of been a little bit overzealous in my training and with the beautiful Sensei Tower, and it's kind of going, she's like looking at me like, she didn't say that, but she looks at it, she sees that stuff, and I guess, how do you support each other along that road?
Right. So funny enough, like me and my husband Josh, we met each other through karate. So it was first karate, then the relationship, opposed to like one of us influenced the other one into doing it. So that was nice. So we both already had like a really strong passion for it, which was, I think, kind of a strong basis for our relationship. And so when we first started dating, he was actually he was recently, I guess a couple of years before, he got his black belt, and I think I was a blue belt at the time when we got together. And so I remember it was kind of like a little bit of an issue. We were like, is this okay? It's like, because he's a black belt, and he started running the dojo, and I was like, I think it is. I was like, should we ask? And so we kind of asked our head instructor, like, is this okay? They're like, he's like, yeah, I'm happy for you, great. And I was the one who kind of initiated things, which I think makes it more okay when the woman's like, no, I'm the one who's approaching him. So when we were coming up, and we first started dating, our rule was nothing interferes with the dojo. So I remember one time we had literally had a little spat before we got into the dojo, but when we got in there, we were complete professionals. Nobody was to the wiser. But yeah, it's like we've always worked really well together. It's like you'd run classes with one another. In some ways, it was good because I can tell when without him speaking, if he needed something within the dojo or something to happen within the dojo, I could support that without us verbalizing it. And I'm sure you probably had this as well. Just because we knew each other's mannerisms, and so I'm like, okay, yeah, he needs the students to do this. But yeah, it's been really great. Actually, during COVID, because we had the lockdowns here, like we were able to train together in terms of like, because they had online classes, but outside of that, we generally didn't train together. It was only for like when we were doing that. And then we actually trained a good part of the day together. And usually when we're doing BJJ, we do. A part of that for me is like I have a rib injury, and so I know that he knows there's an injury there. So I don't have to worry about explaining it or being like, don't do this. Like he knows what position is going to bother me. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, it's like we're both extremely flexible people. In terms of like our attitudes, and very adaptable. So it's like if one of us is having a hard day, the other one knows how to support the other person. And I think just that emotional intelligence is something that I think more martial artists have. Like they have this certain awareness of seeing these micro identifiers in terms of people's expressions or how they're placing their hands, that you kind of just know what to do. So that part's been really valuable, I think, as for our relationship. And because we're both very passionate about what we're doing, like we always have something to talk about, which I think is really great in any relationship. I think I know there's some people that have partners where they have nothing in common, and it's like they only kind of spend time together to watch television or go out to dinner. And I was like, what do you people do for fun if you don't do things with one another other than eating and watching TV?